Trump is learning pretty quickly the concept of F around, find out, as his tariff scheme just got turned on its head. So just yesterday, he took to Truth Social, writing, "On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country." Well, turns out both Canada and Mexico have a pretty good sense of who Trump is by now, and a pretty good sense that he's not interested in diplomacy and only cares about brute force. And so today, the Mexican president suggested Mexico could respond to any of Donald Trump's tariffs with tariffs of its own on U.S. products. And as for Canada, well, they issued a statement that included a thinly veiled threat of their own. Quote, "Our relationship today is balanced and mutually beneficial, particularly for American workers. Today, Canada buys more from the United States than China, Japan, France, and the UK combined. Canada is essential to U.S. domestic energy supply, and last year, 60% of U.S. crude oil imports originated in Canada." In other words, from Mexico, you've got the explicit threat of a trade war, and from Canada, you've got the implicit threat of a trade war. And I want to be crystal clear here. There are no winners in a trade war. None. No matter how big and powerful we all like to believe the United States is, we live in a global economy, and two of our top three biggest trade partners are the exact countries that Donald Trump is attacking as we speak. That means just as much as we can inflict pain on them, they can inflict pain on us. Consider, for example, the leverage that Canada has, as explained in the statement that I just read. There is a reason that Canada's Deputy Prime Minister made it clear that 60% of U.S. crude oil imports originate in Canada. It's because they know that we rely on that oil to fuel our energy sector. No pun intended. They are not without leverage here. And if the U.S. is going to attack Canada, then clearly Canada is willing to reciprocate, and they know they can. And it's not just oil and gas either. Consider the leverage that Mexico has over the U.S. with regard to our food supply. Take a look at this chart that shows where our vegetables come from. See all that green? That's our imports from Mexico. And in red are our imports from Canada. That is 15 billion pounds of produce, a gap that we wouldn't be able to compensate for, meaning we'll still need to import that food, it'll just be more expensive. Why? Because tariffs are a tax not on the exporting country, but rather on the consumer of the importing country. That means us. And by the way, for anyone who thinks that Trump couldn't possibly saddle us with a costly trade war, might I remind you that he literally already did it with China in 2018. According to the Tax Foundation, the Trump administration imposed nearly $80 billion worth of new taxes on Americans by levying tariffs on thousands of products valued at approximately $380 billion in 2018 and 2019, amounting to one of the largest tax increases in decades. Here's Tennessee's Department of Agriculture Commissioner back in 2019 discussing the impacts of the trade war on farmers and the Trump administration being forced to make those farmers whole by using tax dollars to compensate for him starting a trade war.
60% of our exports were going to China. Trade wars started that effectively lost soybean, corn, took a big hit. I mean, it really, and all farmers in the whole country were affected, and especially those that grow a lot of row crops in West Tennessee. At least some reports that they're making progress with China now. Even if that progress is made and you reinstitute that market, it's going to take some time to get it back developed. Some people say a year or two even after that.
So you think the subsidies that they get, they'll hold out, probably won't go bankrupt, anything like that?
Well, the money that they get's not going to fill the hole completely. We need some movement on and try to reopen that market before we'll be fully whole.
The reality is that another trade war, especially with both Canada and Mexico, will impact nearly every part of our economy. Take a look at this chart to see what the U.S. imports from Canada. Cars, tractors, trucks and parts, machinery and appliances, aluminum, iron, steel, wood, plastics, paper, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers. Or how about this chart to see what the U.S. imports from Mexico? Machinery and mechanical appliances, electronics, cars, tractors, trucks, parts, film equipment, beverages and alcohol, iron, steel, plastics, furniture, bedding, lamps. Here's that point being made on CNN as well.
If you voted for Trump because you thought he was going to bring down the cost of housing, a lot of our lumber, cement, other materials comes from Canada, which means that construction costs are going to go up. Not to mention all of the ways he's going to roil the U.S. auto industry, because a lot of autos cross borders in North America multiple times before they're ultimately finished and sold to consumers. Not to mention the fact that a lot of U.S. manufacturers purchase inputs, intermediate goods like metals and cement and other things from Canada, from Mexico, and not to mention even the retaliation that we should expect. All of which is going to be very bad for consumers, not to mention, again, many of the U.S. workers that Trump allegedly wants to help.
All of which is to say, again, that trade wars have no winners. There is a reason that diplomacy is a better tool than entering office an unhinged toddler and waging your economic wars on your allies. These people are literally our allies. They aren't even our enemies. Trump can parrot America first until he's blue in the face, but we live in a global economy. We rely on other countries to keep that economy running, and we are better off cooperating with them than declaring war on them, which seems like a pretty basic concept, and yet here we are. And look, we could go on and on about how these tariffs are going to touch every part of our lives here in the US, and trust me, they will. But what I think is the more brazen part of this is that Donald Trump and Republicans spent the better part of a year completely destroying the Biden White House for high prices as the result of inflation, which of course was out of the White House's control. Inflation was a global phenomenon, and as the result of that inflation, there wasn't a single incumbent party in any industrialized country on earth that did not lose seats in their majorities or just lose their elections outright. That is how consequential the phenomenon of inflation was. This was a miserable year for incumbents across the entire globe, and the US wasn't spared by that. And Trump, whether fairly or not, was the beneficiary of that anti-incumbent sentiment as the result of high inflation. And yet now, the very first thing he's seeking to do in office on the back of that anti-inflation sentiment is going to be to take action that'll have the effect of raising prices. So either he truly does not have one single person in his orbit who understands the consequences of tariffs and their impact on consumers, or he never actually cared about lowering costs and he just attacked the Democrats on an issue that he recognized was potent while being fully willing to extract even more pain onto the country for the very thing that he accused the left of doing. That is Donald Trump's depravity, hypocrisy, and lack of care for the American people on full display. So while it's silly to ever try and predict what's going to happen in the Trump era, I can say with certainty that if there is a trade war, everything will be more expensive. Cars, parts, electronics, food, alcohol, gas, utilities, drugs, and more. This is the warning. Right now, Donald Trump knows what will happen. Whether he's capable of being enough of an adult to actually listen remains to be seen. Before you go, just a quick note, if you'd like to see more of my content, which is always free of advertising, sponsorships, and paywalls, please make sure to subscribe to this channel using the subscribe button right here on the screen. And if you'd like to support my work even further, you can grab a copy of my instant #1 New York Times selling book, Shameless, available for sale right now. That link is also on the screen. Thanks so much for watching.